We're now on Daf Chaf Aleph Amud Beis, and we're explaining why is it that in the case of a get that's written on the hand, the arm of an Eved, he has to give her the entire Eved, lo efshel mikte. He's not allowed to be chovel biavdo, and therefore he cannot cut off the arm. He's got to give her the Eved. Ella, what we don't understand is, why is it that if he writes the get on the keren of a para, then the halacha is he's got to give her the entire para? Why not liktze? Why does he have to give up the entire cow? Let him cut off the keren, v'leisivle, and give her the keren. And the Gemara answers, "Hamakra v'kasav v'nasanlo." We have in the pasuk both ksiva and nesiva, which means that there are two pu'ulos. There's the writing of the get and the giving of the get. There's nothing in between. And that means however, if you need a ktsitza between the ksiva and the nesina, then you break up the connection between the ksiva and the nesina. The ksiva is the beginning of the nesina, and the nesina is the culmination of the ksiva. If you have to break up that siruf between the ksiva and the nesina by cutting off the get, then that's not gerushin. That's called mechusar, ksiva, ktsitza, unesina. And therefore, if he gives her the entire para without cutting off the keren, then it's fine. He's got ksiva and then nesina without a ktsitza in the middle. Rabbi Yossi Aglili Omer, Rabbi Yossi Aglili disqualifies a get that's written on an animal or on an eved, which is called yesh ba ruach chayim, or on any food stuff. My time of the Rabbi Yossi Aglili. And the Gemara answers this sanya. Rabbi Yossi Aglili derives it from the word sefer. The Torah says, "V'kasav la sefer krisus," and the sefer is a klaf, which is obviously an inanimate object. It's not an ochel. Is ainly el sefer minayin l'rabos kol davar. How do I know that you could write a get on something that's not a klaf and it doesn't qualify as sefer? Talmud Lomer, the Torah was unusually and unnecessarily lengthy, and it says v'kasav la. It could have just said v'nosan sefer krisus biyado. What's v'kasav la? And that's called a ribuy of mikol makom. And even if it's written on something that's not a klaf, imkain ma Talmud Lomer sefer, but the Torah says sefer, which is a klaf. So you have a ribuy of v'kasav la, but then you have a miut of sefer. And the Gemara answers, this is Rabbi Yossi Aglili Shita, Ma Sefer Dover She'ein Bo Ruach Chaim Ve'eno Ochel, Af Kol Dover She'ein Bo Ruach Chaim Ve'eno Ochel. But in the case of something that has Ruach Chaim, or it's an Ochel, that's not similar to Sefer, and that's excluded and disqualified as a get from the Pasuk Sefer. For Rabbanon, what are the Rabbanon going to do with the word Sefer? So the Gemara explains the following. If there would have been an extra base, then the Rabbanan would have agreed to Rabbi Yossi Aglili. Iksiv bas sefer, if it would have said because of law bas sefer, then we would say kidduka amrit. Then we would agree that bas sefer means a klaf, and we would darshan that because of law is telling me that it's got to be similar to a sefer. And that means similar to a klaf, but that's not what it says in the Torah. The Torah doesn't say because of law bas sefer, sefer. And therefore, what do I do with the word sefer? Sefer describes the nature of the get. L'sfiras dvarim hudiyasa. It's a sefer krisus that's telling us the story as if it was a story. It's not written like a regular shtar of in first person, but rather it's written about a certain man whose name is in the get, a certain woman whose name is written in the get, and the story is told of this krisus. The Ramban, back on Daf Chav, tells us that we derive from this that the get has to have the Shem Abal, Shem Iro, Shem Ha'isha, Shem Ira, and that's called Sipur Dvarim Shel Maisa Krisus. The Gemara now asks the following kasha. You just told me that according to Chachamim, you don't have to write the get on a klav, And since it doesn't say bas sefer, but rather it says sefer krisus, we don't use the v'kasav law as a ribui for shar dvarim. So the Gemara says the following, okay, fine. So what are the Rabbanan going to do with the extra v'kasav law? For Rabbanan hai v'kasav law, my avdile. So again, from the fact that it doesn't say bas sefer, the Rabbanan have a ribui that you go beyond klaf and it's b'chol dov. However, what do we do with v'kasav law? Because we said before that v'kasav law was an arichas dvarim that was redundant. It was unnecessary. It could have said v'nasan sefer krispi yada, and it came to be marba things other than the klaf. But you already were marba other than the klaf from the word sefer because it doesn't say bas sefer. And the Gemara answers, what is v'kasav according to Rabbanan miboile? V'ksiva miskareshes v'eda miskareshes b'kesef. There's a havamina that if a Baal would give a pruta to his wife, he could say areyat miskareshes b'kesef zeh. If not for the fact that it says v'kasav b'ksiva miskareshes. What was the havamina that you could give kesef to a woman as a divorce? Salta kaita chamina akish yitzia lavaya. We have a famous hekesh of Havaya Yitzia. Right? It says v'yotza mi beisav v'holcha v'hoisa lishacher. And in the Parsha Kedushin it says v'hoisa lishacher. So from this hekesh I would see ma Havaya, just like Kedushin is bekesef, af yitzia nami bekesef. He could be begarish his wife by giving her kesef. His kamash malon. The pasuk wants to tell me v'kasav that she's only miskareshes through a ksiva and not through kesef. So the Gemara now asks the question of Eidach. What about Rabbi Yossi Aglili, who derives from a kasav, a ribui that you could give a get that was written on something similar to klav, but not dafka klav? So how is he going to derive the exclusion of kesef? Nafkale, he derives it from sefer krisus. And that means that sefer korsa v'yein davar acher korsa. So the smichus here between the words sefer and krisus is coming to tell you that the krisus has to be effectuated by a sefer. But something that's not a sefer, like for example, kesef doesn't tell a single story, that is not a sefer krisus. The ida. And what about the chachamim? They exclude gerushin bekesef from the word v'kasav. What are they going to do with the smichus between sefer and krisus? The boile, they derive a different principle from that smichus. Davar kores lebeino, beino lebeino. It's got to be an absolute separation. She's no longer connected to him and dependent upon him. Kirisanya hareza gitech al menashe lo tishte yayin li olam. Hareza gitech al menashe lo tech li beis avich li olam. Ein zeh krisus. This is not a valid get because li olam, forever and ever, she's dependent upon this Tanai. The Tanai incarcerates her, so to speak, that she won't be able to drink wine, she won't be able to visit her father. However, if he makes a Tanai, hareza gitech al manash lo tishte yain ad shloshim yom, hareza sefer krisus, it's a valid get. The idach, and what about Rabbi Yossi Aglili? From whence does he derive that if the get is not kores and complete separation, it's not a valid get? More answers kores krisus. From the fact that the Torah was very extra, and it could have said kores, it could have said sefer kores, and it says sefer krisus, that's going to teach me that there's got to be an absolute krisus that separates him from her liol. The idach, what about the chachamim? Kores krisus lo darsh. And this leads us to the Mishnah here on Daf Chof Aleph Amid Beis. The Mishnah says, Ein kosvin b'mechuber l'karka. The language of the Mishnah, Ein kosvin, sounds like a gzera d'Rabbanan. Now, it's l'chatchila, the get should not be written on mechuber l'karka. And that means that at the time of the ksiva, it should be roy immediately for nesina. And we don't need an extra pa'ula of ktsitza, of tlisha min ha-mechuber. However, ksavo b'mechubar, and then tolsho, after the writing of the get, it was detached. V'chasamo, the Edom signed at that point, unisona lo kosher. So this is not the ideal situation, because we just finished saying that ain't kosvim b'mechubar l'karka. Here he writes, ksavo b'mechubar. In other words, b'di'evet, if he violated this gzeres chachamim, and he wrote the get on mechubar, then it's still kosher b'di'evet, post fact. Rabbi Yehuda posel should take ksivasa v'gam chasimasa b'tolish. In other words, Rabbi Yehuda wants the laws of chasima to impact on the laws of ksiva, and the ksiva has the same requirements as the chasima. And this, in my humble opinion, although I didn't find this explicitly, would reflect the Shita Rabbi Lazar that the get has to be written lishma, so that the dinim of lishma apply to the ksiva and also to the requirement of tolush. Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira Omer ein kosvin lo al niyar machuk. And what we're going to see is if this was writing on a cloth and then they erased it, then it's very easy to write something else and erase something else. Once it's already a niyar machuk, then you'll never know exactly what was erased. So it could be, for example, the Baal had added a Tanai in the get, that this get is only valid if you pay me 200 zuz, but it was written on a niyar machuk, and now she might take this get and she might erase that Tanai, and nobody would know the difference. Yet the Gemara Baba Basra does establish on Daf Kuf Samach Dalid that Eino Domek Sav Shenimchak Pama Achas Lenimchak Shtei Piyomim. So therefore, with regard to our Mishnah, one second. V'lo diftera. Okay, that's a different kind of ksava yochel is daif because it's a cloth that was not tanned properly, and it's very easy to erase. V'bnei yochel is daif. So as we said before, maybe she erased the Tanai. Now, in a very long note over here, he goes through Rashi, Tosa, and Ramban. According to Rashi, the get and the chasima sa'edim were written on a niyar machuk. So now the Tosas raises the question, what do you mean niyar machuk? If she's going to now erase a second time, we have the Gemara in Babasa in Domek Sav Shenifchak Pam Achas Lenimcha Beis Piyomin. So therefore, if there was a second mechika, so it was a niyar machuk, and then the get was written on it, let's say with a Tanai, and then she erased the Tanai, it would be nikar. We would see the second mechika. Therefore, Tosas interprets that we're talking about a case where it was written on niyar she'eno machuk. However, the Eidim signed on a machuk. In other words, there was a part of the cloth that had an erasure, and the Eidim added the name exactly at that point. And what we're afraid of in such a case is that maybe the ksav up on top, which was never erased, will now be erased. And that's not nikah. And the Ramban, on the other hand, says we're talking about a ksav shoyakosav ala macha, and the Eidim signed on the niyar chalak, and therefore we're afraid that she'll erase the machak, and you'll never know the difference because the chasima is on a niyar chalak. Chachamim achshiri. Now the chachamim are based on a different shita, and that's Rabbi Lazar, who holds Eidim Masira Karsa. So it means that the Eidim Masira saw the Masiras Haget. They read the get before it was handed from the Baal to the Isha, and they know there was no Tanai. Or, alternatively, they know there was a Tanai. The Gemara says, Ksavo, ala mechubar, how could the Mishnah say ksamo ala mechubar? V'amar reisha ein kosvu. So there's a steer in the Mishnah. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Shmuel, v'hu, when it says in the Mishnah that if he wrote the get on mechubar, it's kosher, that's a sheer makom hatoref. The toref is the ikar get, the shema ish, the shema isha and atzman, and possibly also, that's a sugya later on, areat muteres l'chol adam. And all this was written after he was tolesh min mechubar. So the tofes, which is the secondary part of the get, was written by mechubar, but the toref, the space for the toref was left open, and then after the tlisha, they filled in the toref I get. So since they wrote the toref in tolush, the get is kosher. And when it says in the Reisha of the Mishnah, Ein kosim v'mechubar, that's referring to a case where he was not mishayer mokom hatoref. V'chein amar Reb Elazar, Reb Oshia, v'hu shashir mokom hatoref, v'chein amar Rabba bar Yochanan, amar Reb Yochanan, v'hu shashir mokom hatoref. Now the Gemara adds the following. This Mishnah, which requires that the toref, the ikar get, has to be written b'tolush, that reflects the shita Reb Elazar to made a mesira karsa. So what creates the get? It's the mesira b'fnei shnei edim. The edim create their machsha the get. That's called ashvuyei shtar. And it's the edim that really effectuate the creases beino beina. Therefore, on a doraisa level, we don't need chasimas ha'edim on the get. Because when it says in the Torah v'kasav, it's referring to the ksivas haget. So if there are edim who saw the mesira of this get, then she's megureshes. What I don't understand here is why the Gemara didn't make this point even with regard to a ksav sheyochel is diet. Niyar machuk. I don't know, maybe that's going to come up later in the Gemara, but it would seem to me that Niyar machuk would not be a problem according to Reb Elazar, because the Edim Asira testify that this was the get that was written without any t'nai, etc., and delivered in our presence to the Isha. But with regard to Tolush, then the Ikar Ksivas Haget has to be B'Tolush, because what does V'Kasav mean according to Reb Elazar? It means Ksivas Haget. So that's why the Ikar Haget, meaning the Torah, has to be written B'Tolush. As far as Rabbi Meir is concerned, even if you found a get in the garbage pail, as long as the chasima was lishma, then the get is kosher. So there are no real restrictions in terms of the ksiva itself. But according to Reb Elazar, that the Edim Asira create the get, and therefore there are no Edi chasima on the get, the ksivas haget has to be betolush. V'hachi kamar. And now we understand the Mishnah. Again, all this is before Reish Lakish. So we're going to have a revolution in understanding this Mishnah according to Reish Lakish. But now, before Reish Lakish, this is what the Tana has in mind when it says Ein kosvin b'mechubar, Ein kosvin even the toref b'mechubar. And that's Gzeira Shemi Yichtov es HaToref b'mechubar. If the Torah for the get, the Ikar get is written b'mechubar, the get is possible, because Rabbi Elazar holds that a kosav refers to the ksivas haget, and the ksivas haget has to be betolush, right? For kosav v'nosan shalote mechusa ktzitza, etc. Now let's say he went ahead and he wrote the get b'mechubar, but he only wrote the tofes haget b'mechubar. So that's a gzeira shemi yichtofes hatoref. Tzlasho ksavel toref. After the tzlish, he wrote the toref, And therefore the get is kosher, even according to Rabbi Elazar, who interprets for kosav. Unisana lo kosher, even though he violated the Gzeira D'Rabbanan, he should not have written a tofes on mechubar, but nevertheless, b'di'evid, it's kosher. So we have a halacha of ein kosvin l'chatchila, and then we have a halacha of nisano lo kosher b'di'evid. Ein kosvin l'chatchila, even though he's only writing the tofes, but we have a gzeira of tofes otu toref, and b'di'evid, if he wrote the get, meaning the toref I get, b'mechubar, and then he was tolish, and then he wrote the toref I get, the get is kosher. So it means that until this point in the Gemara before Reish Lakish, we are reconciling our Mishnah according to Rabbi Elazar. Reish Lakish Omar Asamo Shanina. Right? If we look at the Mishnah, it says Kosvu b'mechubar tolshu v'chasmu, and the emphasis here is on the chasima, and therefore Rabbi Meir he the Omeredi chasima karsi. Our Mishnah does not have to reflect the Shita of Elazar. We could equally interpret it according to Rabbi Meir. And what makes the get into a get is the Eidei Chasima. They're going to create the Chalos Gerishin, the Krisus. And the word V'kasav there is referring to the Chasima Sa'edim. That's the Ikar get. So again, the word V'kasav, with all the requirements, like for example, it's got to be Tolush, that means Ikar get. What is the Ikar get? If your old lady Masira Karse, the Ikar get is the Ksivas Aget. If your old lady Chasima Karse, the Chasima is the Ikar get. What creates the get? Is it the Edi Masira, that's Rabbi Elazar, or is it the Edi Chasima, and that's Rabbi Meir? And when the Tana says in the Reisha, Ein Kosu b'mechubar l'karka, which l'chora makes no sense, because if we're going according to Rabbi Meir, who cares whether the Ksiva was betolish or b'mechubar? There are no dinim in Ksiva. You can find it getting in the rubbish bin. And the answer is l'chatchila ein kosvin toref gzeira shaviyachtam. If we allow you to write the get on mechubar, meaning the toref I get, then you might come to sign the edim when the get is still mechubar, and that would be a psul d'oraisa according to Rabbi Meir, because the chasima is the ikar v'kosav law, and that requires tolush. Kosvo, however, la toref, if he wrote the toref, which again, according to Rabbi Meir, if he wrote the toref on mechubar, that's not really a problem. We're just worried about shemiyachton utlosha v'chasamo. So again, he didn't do what he was supposed to do, but the Eved, the son of Lokosh. Now we get to the sugya of otzitz. And we're talking specifically about an otzitz nokuf. That's a perforated flower pot. Savo al cheres shel otzitz nokuf. Now that kli, because the vegetation growing inside the kli nourishes from the karka is called mechubar l'karka. Kosher. The get is kosher. Now, why is the get kosher if he wrote the get on mechubar l'karka? Because he's not going to cut off the otzitz from the karka below it, but rather he gives her the entire otzitz. And it's like the case of the Eved, where you wrote the get on the Eved and then you give her the Eved, or on the Keren Shel-Parah. So there was no additional pu'ula that separated between the ksiva and the nesina. And therefore it's not mechusa ktsitza. However, al ola shel otzitz nakuv, but if he wrote the get on a leaf in this perforated flower pot, not on the kli itself, but on a leaf, is that's a machlokas Abai v'Rav. Abai omer kosher v'Rav omer posel. Abai omer kosher. Now we turn to Chav Beis. The shokele v'yoev le nial. He gives her the entire atzitz, and he doesn't know another. He doesn't perform another pu'ula of ktsitza between the ksiva and the nesina, and therefore Abai holds that ola shel otzitz nakuv is kosher, like the case of the Keren of Parah. Rav Amar Pasuk Gzeir Sheva Yikto. So Rava says that even though he gave her the entire otzitz without ktsitza, so there's no mechusa ktsitza, the Rabbanan passel to get, because they were afraid that maybe he won't give her the entire otzitz, but rather it'll be tolesh the olah, and then there was a ktsitza that separated between the ksiva and the nesina. Okay, now the Gemara is going to go on to different kinyonim that will apply to an otzitz nakuf, and that Mirz Hashem we'll see tomorrow. So let me wish you a great day, and thank you so much.